Hello and welcome to Projector, and recently I got invited to the multimedia screening of Evil Dead Burn, but I wasn't alone.
Hi, I'm Rob Hill, I'm the Bad Movie Bible.
And together we went and saw the movie, and we're going to talk about it right here, right now, in an absolutely scorching heatwave, which is very appropriate. When her husband Will, played by George Pullart, is killed in a fiery car crash, Suhaila Yacoub's Alice attends the funeral with his family, including his brother Joseph and his partner Thea, played by Hunter Doohan and Lucine Buchanan, Will's parents Susan and Edgar, played by Tandy Wright and Errol Shand, and his grandmother Polly, played by Maud Davey. As the family reunited their home, tensions rise to the surface and take a monstrous turn because aspiring writer Joseph has been researching from the Book of the Dead. Well, we saw this movie together, and of course, you have a little bit of history with Evil Dead, don't you?
I do. Well, I've got a lot of history with Evil Dead on a personal level, because it's been one of fundamentally my favourite horror franchise ever since I can remember, really, because those first three films from the 80s and 90s are just masterpieces, every one of them.
And of course, you did your video about remake exploitation of Evil Dead. I'm just mentioning this now as an absolutely shameless plug, but I mean, you're here, so I have to.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I went pretty deep. Not as deep as it's possible to go on some movies, but like trying to figure out exactly what its influence was is so tricky because it's so tied up with the whole Cabin in the Woods thing, which it did essentially invent. You know, I mean, there were Cabin in the Woods movies before Evil Dead, but so many of the tropes and so much of what we associate with it was really just invented by those first two movies.
I'm not quite as closely tied to Evil Dead because I think I came to it a lot later than a lot of people did. I kind of caught up with it in my teens. I think I saw it in the correct order, but like over a span of years. But I have seen all of the films. Army of Darkness or kind of Evil Dead 2 are probably my favourites out of them. And I think that probably gives you an idea that I respect the first one, but I also think it's not entirely my cuppa. There is a bit of a schism with Evil Dead fans. There's, there's the ones that kind of like the Three Stooges one, and the ones that want the like proper grueling horror experience.
I think it's like one of these national differences as well. When I was growing up, and even now, everyone seems to prefer Evil Dead 2. Evil Dead 2 is the preference over Evil Dead, full stop. But when you speak to Americans, it's always the other way around. Certainly when I was like a teenager, the first film didn't really interest me a huge amount. And to be honest, it was probably only really going deep on the Borrowing Blockbusters episode that gave me a new appreciation for it. And like you, I'm not the biggest horror guy in the world, but something about that first film really did click with me. It's masterpiece level now, as far as I'm concerned.
You can understand why they've used that as the template ever since they reboosted it. Obviously, there was the Fede Alvarez movie, which was sort of remake, sort of continuation. And then, of course, we've had the new batch of movies, Rise and now Burn. And what I think is interesting is that Evil Dead is surprisingly malleable. Like, it's taken a lot of different forms. I mean, even with the original Raimi films, you kind of had the horror one, the comedy one, and then the kind of fantasy adventure one.
It is a strange franchise in that way, isn't it? And I think it might be something to do with the fact that Sam Raimi isn't a particularly big horror guy either. He made a horror movie because that's what he could get financed and he knew it would do well. What he really wanted to make was a Three Stooges movie at the end of the day. So he sort of gradually got there one step at a time. That original trilogy just has such a broad range of tones and different types of content and genres and styles. Gives people a free hand going forwards to do almost whatever they want with the series.
He's effectively used it as a way of getting like new horror filmmakers noticed, using that as a platform in the same way it did for him back in the day. Just also the fact that it doesn't feel like it's rigidly tied to the original film. So many like long-running franchises feel like they're locked into having the original cast keep coming back and keep coming back and coming back and coming back. Bruce Campbell was retired from the role of Ash. He's literally said, "I'm too old to be doing this," and he's right. I think there is something to be said about getting some new blood in, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And also, like, you couldn't put Bruce Campbell in the movie we just watched, you know?
No.
Like, what on earth would he be doing in it? He wouldn't fit the tone at all in any way. It's not a fussy series or a fussy franchise. It's not full of itself, and it's not full of its own mythology and so on. And like this, which in a way is a bad thing as well, I suppose, because it does mean that it doesn't really have an identity all of its own. Like this movie really plays around with the established mythology that we know about.
The Evil Dead framework is that essentially you've got a bunch of characters encountering the Book of the Dead and they raise deadites. That's a simple template. It doesn't even need a cabin in the woods anymore. I mean, the most recent two movies, Rise and now Burn, and I keep conflating them two because they are quite similar in some respects because they both focus on family elements. In this movie, it's sort of closer because it's a secluded house, but in the last movie, it was an apartment block. I didn't mind Rise, but I also strangely don't find it a very memorable movie in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I can't remember anything about it.
It didn't feel kind of like Sam Raimi, but maybe that's a good thing because, of course, it has to have some of that Raimi-ness in there, but it has to have the director's own voice in there.
That's something they handled really well, actually. The references, I thought, to the original movies and to Raimi's style. There were lots of references, but they were done in a different way. They were done in the style of the filmmaker himself, not copying Raimi's reference. Especially like the camera movements. There's one beautiful slow motion, stylish version of the Raimi cam.
The director this time around is Sebastian Vanacek, who is a French filmmaker. And he came up from the movie Infested. That caught the attention of Sam Raimi. And you can clearly tell that Vanacek has come up with the French New Extremity movement. Because, my goodness, does Burn have that energy? Like, it really does. Right from the opening bit, you have this, like, horrendous kill involving fishing wire. And then someone gets broiled alive. And that is the hors d'oeuvre, ladies and gentlemen. If you find that to be too much, you might as well just step out at that point because the rest of the movie just keeps going further and further.
To be perfectly honest with you, I was mildly shocked a couple of times. How much I enjoyed the overall movie is one thing, but the horror aspect of it is really effective, really varied as well. It's not just about jump scares, and it's not just about suspense, and it's not just about gore. It goes to the extreme in every single horror category, and pretty much within the first 5 minutes as well.
It is an absolutely brutal movie, and that's a lot of what some people want from Evil Dead. They want it to be pushing the boundaries because, of course, Evil Dead famously video nasty in the UK and banned in a whole lot of other places as well. For the time, that was really boundary pushing, so it kind of feels like this movie is pushing back in that direction. You said you were shocked. I was shocked at certain points at just how violent this film was. There is a scene of extremely sustained head trauma in this that I genuinely thought, how on earth did this get past the censors? It's like borderline irreversible level carnage there.
I was going to say it's like irreversible, but more. At least one point that I looked away, and I know I did then. And there were other points as well when the whole audience were kind of gasping and reacting in a way that I'm not used to in a cinema, to be honest. Where I live, it just doesn't happen.
We should say for clarity, I was invited to this multimedia screening, but that's not going to really influence my opinion on the movie because I did have to pay an entire train fare to get there. It was mostly just to see the movie early. But we had the right crowd for the movie.
Yeah.
The movie kind of starts off as it means to go along, and it has a little bit of a lull because obviously it needs to set up a story in the first act, but otherwise, it pretty much from the halfway point is the usual Evil Dead experience where it's just one thing happening on top of another, just set piece after set piece after set piece. In terms of the story itself, that is where I'm a little bit conflicted about it. They're trying to do this kind of dark story about abusive relationships and toxic families, and that's a really interesting idea to use as the basis for an Evil Dead movie because, of course, the thing that the Deadites do is get into people's heads and try and use their psychology against them, and so that feels like it's really connected to that idea. I just wish that there was a bit more kind of meat on the bone in that the characters, they're kind of one-dimensional. You know, they have their kind of setup. Like, you got the dad who feels very guilty and they keep having to pull the knives away from There's the mother that's kind of passive aggressive. You got the brother who's a bit of a coward. They're not really sketched in more depth than that. Basically, they are there to be transformed eventually.
I kept waiting for the leading lady in particular to be sort of like, well, she's clearly going to be the one the movie centres around. There was never anything to really grasp onto with her. I'm going to get into trouble here because I don't normally cover or really spend much time talking about modern movies, but whenever I do, if I do a commentary on something, I always seem to have a more negative take than most people, and I always get in trouble for it, people, because this film is really popular. It's got really good ratings everywhere I've seen it. I'm not entirely sure why, because outside of that roller coaster horror aspect, it is a bit disjointed as well. The first act I didn't really understand at all. Why were we introduced to these characters? I mean, it's a great set piece in a lake with some really spooky imagery of just like a head emerging out of the middle of a lake. It's a really good shot, which I should say there's lots of in this movie. Visually, it is absolutely stunning. We don't know who these characters are, which is fine, but then contextually, what does it have to do with the rest of the movie? Normally, the way these things work is someone accidentally raises the dead, and then the dead come and attack them. But here, I didn't really understand what had raised the dead in the first place, because no one speaks aloud from the Book of the Dead until halfway through the movie. A deadite shows up in the very opening scene, kills a couple of people who we never see again, and then accidentally gets run over by one of these family members. So it would appear to be a complete coincidence.
Except it turns out that it isn't.
Except this is the one family that can actually, do away with the deadites because it's the grandchildren of the grandfather. Not sure if it's meant to be exactly the same character from the original movie, but the grandmother who is still alive in this looks exactly like Henrietta from the second Evil Dead movie in particular.
Oh, they absolutely cast her for that reason. They absolutely did.
We don't know who she is yet. She's obviously still alive. The deadites haven't attacked them yet. As soon as I saw her, I just thought, someone's in my fruit cellar. Because she looks exactly like him, so you know immediately what's going to happen. And that is one of the downsides, I think. Within 5 minutes of meeting every single character, you know exactly what their arc is going to be. You almost know when they're going to get killed. You can pretty much guess the order they're going to go in. But, that's not necessarily a crucial thing in a movie like this.
The movie aspires to having this kind of difficult theme. I think it is the darkest of the Evil Dead movies because of it. In the same way that the Alvarez movie kind of gestures towards the struggles of drug addiction as a metaphor. And I think both movies fall down at trying to make the kind of horror situation into a metaphor. There's a point where it just sort of breaks down. The characters aren't strong enough to carry that as well. You need to really make sure that you have a good, strong character basis there. And I just think it's just that tiny bit undercooked.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And if you want to do that, and it makes a lot of sense to introduce these difficult family elements. Again, the problem is, like, the mother, really good acting, by the way, I think anyway, across the board. The mother, I thought, was great.
Strong performances here, strong performances.
Yeah. The parents both seem to resent his wife, who is the main character. And it's just so obvious and unpleasant, that resentment, right from the start. And nothing's happened to warrant it. So it immediately makes those parents really unlikable and kind of gives them nowhere to go because, well, we already know what these relationships are now. If that had emerged as things had gone on, as it kind of did with the dad was a little bit more withdrawn. I thought he was a more interesting character. And then he goes completely off the wall, possessed, crazy as well. I know what you mean. Yeah, there should have been a bit more development. It's not the actor's fault. It's just a little underwritten in the character department, I think.
Yeah, Suhelia Yacoub, I thought she was really good in the movie. She was fitting as a scream queen role. She's come up in movies like Gaspar Noé's Climax, and she's also more recently appeared in Dune Part 2. And she definitely has that kind of fitting look for, again, a French New Extremity movie, something like Switchblade Romance or Haute Tension, depending on whatever you call that.
Yeah.
But I feel like her performance is doing a lot of heavy lifting that the script doesn't really make very clear a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's exactly
especially because
right.
They kind of hold back a lot of information deliberately.
What I thought was really striking was how similar at least two of the main characters are to the modern Scream franchise, or the Scream, was it 5 and 6? The actress whose name I can never remember, who is the older sister, is, to my mind, a spitting image of this actress. Even their intonation is really, really similar. They're both dealing with incredibly similar situations in terms of like parental resentment and difficult relationships with siblings and that kind of thing. The main character's brother-in-law, he also really reminded me of Huey from The Boys. I forget his name as well, but in Scream 5 he's like the beta male boyfriend, and they look alike, they have similar mannerisms. So I was wondering if that's like a trend now.
That's Hunter Doohan, by the way, of Wednesday fame. You kind of gestured towards this previously. What they also try to add in, this mythology, and try and connect it into the wider Evil Dead universe. They keep bringing up the wise men, this kind of cult. I'm not sure about that. There is another Evil Dead movie coming out that's already wrapped filming called Evil Dead Wrath, and as I understand that, that's going to be a prequel. I would assume that's going to go more into that. The stuff that about these characters being descendants of the book on the tape and that feels a bit crowbarred in. It's kind of wrestling against the fact that this is meant to be the story of an abused woman standing up for herself against her family that is in total denial of the character of her husband.
I can see why they've done it. It's very Halloween, what is it, Halloween 4, I forget now, when they invent this mad cult mythology.
The Thorn cult.
Yeah. It gives them a lot more opportunities and a lot more scope. But introducing it in this movie, which is so insular and tells such an insular story, it just creates the big question, well, where is this cult? If, like, the dagger, the book, the Deadites, they're all centred around this house and it's all kicking off. Why are we looking at this very limited cast?
But as you said, the way that the movie works best and it clearly adopts is its theme park ride gore that is trying to gross out the audience as much as possible. There is some levity, especially with the grandmother character that has dementia and she doesn't really quite know what's going on. They often lean on her. But yeah, there is absolute carnage in this movie, including some novel uses for a dishwasher especially.
Obviously they're very proud of that because the director and the stars did a little intro and they mentioned that. She also mentioned that by the time she gets the chainsaw, we'll be glad she's got it, or something like, we'll understand why she's got the chainsaw, but then she never does get the chainsaw. I was confused by that.
She gets the weed trimmer.
Yeah.
That's what she ends up using, isn't it? They did have a chainsaw very briefly at the end. There's a chainsaw that pops out when we went go, but she doesn't get the chainsaw.
Yeah, it's one of the nods. Some of the nods back feel a bit forced, like having Bruce Campbell's portrait on the stairs and the chainsaw.
Dead by
it's just
Dawn.
there's just a shot of a chainsaw and it's like, okay, yeah, we know what you're doing. Using the weed trimmer thing instead was actually a great idea because it gives you all kinds of new options.
Absolutely new options for arterial spray.
Yes.
The effects, for the most part, are genuinely quite impressive. Clearly, a lot of them are practical and are really quite viscerally unpleasant because of that. But it also makes the digital moments really stand out as being especially digital and not entirely convincing. The climax in particular is very heavily digital, especially the figure at the end.
There are a few moments here and there where the CGI anyway looks not unfinished, but it's just not the final pass somehow. And there is some other weird little sloppy bits, considering like how strong it is visually, how beautifully shot it is. The camera work is really good. The editing's really good as well. It's not my bag. It's a bit hectic for me, but like the rhythm achieved in the editing and the opening sequence especially I thought was brilliant.
The family dinner table scene is also a marvel of editing and building tension. That whole entire sequence is a definite highlight.
I can see that being the classic scene that this film's remembered for, without a doubt. It won't be the scene when the father's outside in one of the worst day for night shots I've ever seen. It won't be remembered for that. But yeah, that dinner scene is marvellous.
It's weirdly inconsistent because some of it looks fantastic and then some of it is just a little bit like, probably needed a little bit more time to cook there, lads. You mentioned how well shot it is. It's well shot in bursts. The thing that kind of distracted me during the movie is a lot of the coverage is in really tight close-ups.
Yeah.
And I found that a bit distracting after a while, because it's a bit of a cheap filmmaking method of, well, you only have to keep the head in frame. So when they did something much more elaborate, and they do these kind of one-er takes, like the scene where they're all fighting around the table, which was the basis of the film's teaser trailer, that scene looks fantastic because it's been elaborately choreographed, but it kind of stands out in comparison to other scenes where the coverage is really tight.
It's more mid-shots, isn't it, than like proper close-ups. And that does speak to I think maybe the same area as some of the wonky CGI. You know, maybe they were trying to save money here and there for whatever reason.
Yeah. Open it up a bit more so that we get more of a sense of space, and sometimes it just felt a little bit too tight. Generally, I enjoyed myself, though. It's probably a harder horror film than I would like, and as I said, my preference is not really for original flavour Evil Dead. I'm much more into cheese and onion, kind of comedy slapstick Evil Dead. I think it works on the level it's supposed to. It doesn't have enough behind it to give it the level of depth that it clearly aspires to have.
Yeah.
It gestures in the direction of depth, but it doesn't have it.
I think that's exactly right, yeah. And again, like I may sound like I've been quite negative, but I did enjoy it.
Yeah.
There's a period around the funeral, the second fifth of the movie, if you know what I mean, the bit running up to the middle, it was dragging a bit.
Some of the humour in that portion is also a bit ill-placed, I think. Sam Raimi had the kind of slapstickiness, and this one has a bit of a kind of weird thing with doing Gilligan cuts. You know, the smash cut from the car slamming into an extreme close-up of twerking buttocks.
Yes,
and things like that. And it's like slightly juvenile. The scene with in the crematorium, no one seems to notice that he's been bloodily eviscerated off camera. That seemed a little bit weird. But then the movie kind of gets past it.
It does get past it. It does get you back on board. Well, it got me back on board anyway. Then threw me off again in the end credits. God, man, oh man. I hate mid-credits scenes. The credits started and I just got up to go. And you were like, let's see if there's a mid-credit scene. I was like, oh yeah, we've got to do that nowadays, haven't we? So yeah, we do. We get a mid-credit sequel tease, which, fine, whatever. But then we get a post-credits crossover tease as well.
There is not one but two scenes in the end credits. So public service announcement, if you are going to see this movie, you definitely want to stick around during the credits because they're quite significant end credit scenes.
Well, the one in the mid-credits, I think it could easily just be a throwaway joke, couldn't it? But the one after the credits does appear to point in a very particular direction.
I think it's been a really strong year for horror, and it's another example of it. But obviously, when you're comparing it to something on the level of, say, Obsession, you're not really getting that here, but as a theme park ride of grueling indignities and absolutely barbaric gore, it delivers on that level. So the easily squeamish need not apply, but I think if you're a fan of the original flavour of Evil Dead, you'll probably like it quite a bit. If you're the kind of person that prefers Evil Dead 2 or Army of Darkness, this might not be for you necessarily.
That's a really good way of putting it, yeah. I think that's perfect. This is as close as you're likely to get to a modern-day version of the original Evil Dead. And, not a remake, but in terms of, capturing the same kind of essential elements.
This has been fun. This has been incredibly hot, very appropriately for the film, but I think it is time for us to have a nice cold shower. So thank you for joining me, Rob.
I thought you were going to say nice cold beer then. That's what I'm going for.
There's multiple options, let's be honest.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on.
If you like this review and you want to support my work, you can give me a tip on my Ko-fi page, or YouTube's Super Thanks feature, which is right below the video. Or you can keep the Deadites away on my Patreon, where you can see my videos early, among other perks, including access to my Discord server, and you can also join YouTube memberships for similar perks. Or you can just simply like, share, and hype the video. It really does help a lot. Until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.